So welcome to the late night version of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I've got about 45 clips on a bunch of topics for what I think should be a really interesting show tonight. As always, this is my weekly broadcast of the best clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the corporate media here in the United States, along with a little political comedy and along with a little comment of my commentary between the clips. As usual, I'll be using clips from the Sunday morning news shows on the regular big five outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News. And I'll also have a few of those quasi-news political comedy clips from Friday night's Real Time with Bill Maher on HBO. I'll be covering a whole bunch of different topics this week, which I've listed down in the video description rather than listing them verbally here for you. And in fact, I want to start with a clip from Bill Maher's monologue where he talked about the possible darker meaning of all the news stories recently, which you can see over in this clip.
What a great night to be in a good mood, because this is another week where it looks like the world is just falling apart. And, it doesn't. I'm not one of those people who's into, the signs of Armageddon, but I got to admit, there's two wars in the Middle East. Planes are falling out of the sky at an alarming rate. Weird Al Yankovic has the #1 record, so that is a sign of the apocalypse, I'll tell you.
So I don't know if all the news stories are really a sign of the apocalypse, but there are some very serious situations going on in the world. One of the big stories, I'm going to spend a lot of, almost 20 of the 45 or 46 clips I have on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict going on in Gaza. And Benjamin Netanyahu was he on 4 of the 5 shows? I think 4 of the 5 shows Sunday morning, and he was there giving a strong Israeli side. This week there was a lot stronger Palestinian side on the corporate media Sunday morning news shows, and I'll show several different people giving the Palestinian side. But Netanyahu gave the same speech over and over again on all the shows. He went on about how Israel's keeping the ceasefire and the Palestinians are breaking the ceasefire. And I think he said on every single show that the Palestinians were or Hamas, not the Palestinians, but Hamas was breaking their own ceasefire. And I'll show you one example of that from Meet the Press with David Gregory on NBC in this clip.
We've accepted 5 ceasefires, acted upon them. Hamas has rejected every single one of them, violated them, including 2 humanitarian ceasefires, which we accepted and implemented in the last 24 hours. Now Hamas is suggesting a ceasefire, and believe it or not, David, they've even violated their own ceasefire. So they continue to fire at us, and of course, we'll take the necessary action to protect ourselves, to protect our people, including against the terror tunnels that they're digging under our border and trying to reach and blow up our people. We'll do whatever is necessary to defend ourselves.
What?
So yeah, that's Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel, over on NBC's Meet the Press, saying that Israel is willing to accept all these ceasefires and Hamas has rejected them, even rejected their own ceasefire, which, as I said, that Hamas rejecting their own ceasefire talking point was on every single show. In fact, over on Fox News Sunday, the host Chris Wallace was so helpful to the Israeli side that he actually sort of teed up the issue for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. You can see here's Chris Wallace asking a question where he sort of assumes the answer that Netanyahu's going to give, and then he goes ahead and gives it anyway, as you can see over from Fox News Sunday morning here.
Mr. Prime Minister, first Hamas broke the ceasefire and the fighting resumed. Now Hamas wants a ceasefire. Will Israel accept that, and what happens next?
Well, Hamas has broken 5 ceasefires that we accepted and we actually implemented. They rejected all of them, violated all of them, including 2 humanitarian ceasefires in the last 24 hours. Now they come with their own ceasefire proposal, and believe it or not, they violated even their own ceasefire proposal. They're shooting at us as we speak. So Israel is not obliged and is not going to let a terrorist organization determine when it's convenient for them to fire at our cities, at our people, and when it's not, when they can restock. We'll take the necessary action to protect our people, including, by the way, continue to dismantle the tunnels. That's my policy.
So, yeah, that is Benjamin Netanyahu over on Fox News Sunday. You can see basically giving the same answer he gave on Meet the Press, but I thought that Chris Wallace from Fox News Sunday was a little more helpful and sort of assuming some of his answer into the question. But on in the defense of Fox News Sunday this week, they did have Hanan Ashrawi, who is a representative of the Palestinians. I guess she's on the PLO Council, perhaps. But she's not from the Hamas wing. She's from the Fatah wing, the PLO wing of the Palestinians. And she was over on Fox News Sunday, and she directly answered this talking point from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu about Hamas breaking their own ceasefire. And I'll talk about that a little more after you see that clip over here.
On Ashrawi. Ms. Ashrawi, Hamas requested, or rather rejected, a Israeli ceasefire. Then they requested one. You just heard the Prime Minister say they're now violating their own ceasefire. What's going on with Hamas?
Well, actually, the question is not just Hamas itself. There are several resistance groups in Gaza, but Mr. Netanyahu loves to lump everybody under Hamas, accuse Hamas of everything, including killing its own people and so on. No, this is a situation where Israel is holding the Palestinian population captive under a cruel siege by air, by sea, by land, and bombing them and shelling them by air, by sea, and by land, and then blaming the victims for their own deaths. This is unacceptable. The ceasefire is something we wanted, and we have a government of national accord, and we've asked for ceasefires, but we need a ceasefire that will bring about also an end to the conditions that are creating and generating all this violence. Lifting the siege of Gaza, allowing the Gazan people to be able to fish in their own sea, to plant their own lands instead of having them declared buffer zones by Israel, to be free to leave, to meet their families, to live, to study, to build. Israel is not allowing to do any of these things. That's why there's no use just dealing with the latest attack. We need to put in place conditions that will prevent its recurrence. That's why we're asking for a real ceasefire with talks. We've agreed with John Kerry. The Paris proposal, we accepted. All the Palestinians accepted it, but it was Israel that refused it. I don't know why it slipped Netanyahu's mind. The ceasefire that was asked was a ceasefire in order to have talks.
Israel hold.
So yeah, that's Hanan Ashrawi giving the Palestinian position, and it's obviously very different from what Benjamin Netanyahu was saying. And I was glad to see that there was a lot more of the Palestinian position on the Sunday morning news media yesterday morning, because, as I said, this is the late night edition. I'm doing this at like 2 a.m. Monday morning or 2:15 Monday morning my time because of some technical issues I had with the broadcast. But I also want to show one of the other Palestinians who was on the Sunday morning news shows yesterday was Mohammed Shtaya. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. He's an advisor to another one of the Fatah PLO faction of the Palestinians that control the West Bank, not Gaza. Gaza is controlled by Hamas, and although I think I'm going to show a clip of Hanan Ashrawi in a little bit, talking about how there are several different groups. Or did you see that in the last clip? But anyway, this is Mohammed Shtaya, was over on CNN State of the Union talking to Candy Crowley, and he, in the first clip I'm going to show from him, he is just basically answering also about whether the Palestinians are responsible for what's going on, and he specifically talks about this Israeli hidden agenda that I want to talk about a little more after I show the clip to you from CNN State of the Union from Sunday morning with Candy Crowley in this clip.
For us is this aggression that Israel is taking totally unjustified, because we know today that the Israeli chief police has said that nobody has claimed responsibility of the killing of the 3 settlers that has caused all of this aggression on Gaza. So Israel has a hidden agenda to really destroy and to totally destroy the Palestinian reconciliation that has been signed and that has been culminated by the formation of a agreed upon Palestinian government. So Israel wanted to keep Gaza totally separate from the rest of the Palestinian territory because all this aggression is totally unjustified. And I was very shocked that the Prime Minister was speaking about avoiding civilians and so on. 80% of those who have been killed in Gaza are civilians, women, children, old men. 1,080 Palestinians have been killed in the last 18 days. 80% of them are innocent people.
Right.
And they are claiming that they're sending messages to them, and these people have no place to go. Even a UN school was bombarded by the Israeli army.
And I'll get more to that UN school in a couple clips in a little bit, but what Mohammed Shataya was saying there is definitely a message that's getting more into the U.S. media. The Palestinian side is definitely getting a lot more play than it has in the previous Gaza conflicts, I think. And I want to show another clip from Mohammed Shataya there on CNN State of the Union, where Candy Crowley specifically asks him about this charge from Benjamin Netanyahu that Hamas is violating its own ceasefires. And you can see his response over here.
To you is about this ceasefire. I think you heard the Israeli Prime Minister say Hamas is already violating its own ceasefire because they're still firing in Gaza. What's your reaction?
Well, my reaction is that since this morning, while Israel is claiming that it is abiding by ceasefire, 6 Palestinians have been killed, including a Christian nurse in one of the clinics in Gaza. So, by all means, we are very much interested to see an end to the Israeli aggression. And as I understand, the efforts of Secretary Kerry is yielding some fruits. There will be a Palestinian delegation formed by President Mahmoud Abbas going to Cairo to negotiate the terms of ceasefire. But by all means, if the Israeli army is going to be stationed where it is and continue shelling, obviously Israel is very much endangering whether it is a humanitarian ceasefire, whether it is a timing ceasefire, whether it is a long-lasting ceasefire. The Israeli army should not stay where it is now, because the Israeli army now is nearly occupying 50% of the total area of the Gaza Strip, which is no more than 370 square kilometers, with 1.9 million Palestinians living in that very small territory.
So that was again Mohammed Shataya, the advisor to President Mahmoud Abbas, who's the head of the Fatah branch of the Palestinians that controls the West Bank, not the Hamas branch that controls Gaza, where the conflict is going on now. And I want to show one more clip from him where he again talks about this hidden agenda that the Israelis supposedly have. And I've read several articles that are claiming that one of the big purposes of this military action on the part of the Israelis is to drive a wedge between Hamas and Fatah, between the group that controls Hamas, that controls the Gaza Strip, and Fatah, the PLO that controls the West Bank. And a lot of times, I'm going to show some clips from Bibi Netanyahu in a little bit, the Prime Minister of Israel, where he talks about how Gaza has to be demilitarized, and he talks about where the money goes to make sure that it doesn't go to military action on the part of Palestinians. And what he's really talking about is making sure that the money doesn't go to Hamas. And that's what I was reading about in these articles, that Israel doesn't want to give money to Hamas to fund their bureaucracy. It's kind of like their patronage system, so that Hamas doesn't have the power of distributing the money. They want the money to go to Fatah and to the less radical wings, or the Palestinians who aren't Hamas. And anyway, I'll talk about that a little more when I show the clips of Benjamin Netanyahu making that point about demilitarization. But first, here's this last clip of Mohammed Shataya. I believe, yeah, Mohammed Shataya talking about the Israeli hidden agenda on CNN State of the Union with Candy Crowley over here.
By all means, we wanted the situation to be very quiet. We wanted peace, and we wanted to come to terms with the Israelis. Unfortunately, I should be frank here and tell you that the Israelis who have totally pushed the peace talks to failure on the 29th of April. The Israelis who shifted the whole battle from the West Bank into Gaza. Israel wanted to get out of the political corner that it was put into by the international community, by the diplomatic offense that we have been carrying at the international political arena. Israel wanted to drag us into a security square in order for itself to liberate herself from a political square. So this is what is happening now. The Israelis wanted to sabotage the Palestinian reconciliation. The whole Gaza Strip has been under total siege for 7 years. People have not been able to move out of Gaza.
Right.
Palestinians in Gaza don't know what Jerusalem looks like. Palestinians in Gaza don't know what the rest of the world looks like. So they have been under tight siege. If you put any human being in a siege, he will react. So what is the way out for all of this misery is that Israel should end its siege on the Palestinians, whether in the West Bank or Gaza or Jerusalem, and allow the peace talks to continue. Israel has to accommodate the Palestinian demands and aspirations for ending occupation and the establishment of an independent Palestinian state. That is the only answer. The Israeli aggression on Gaza does not bring peace to Israel. We know that. Israel might enjoy another 1 year or 2 years of ceasefire. That is not what we want. We want end of occupation.
Peace.
We want the Palestinian refugees. 62% of those who are living in the Gaza Strip are refugees. We want to end this misery of the Palestinian people in order for us really to live with dignity as human beings in an independent state, side by side with the Israeli state.
So yeah, that's the last clip I'm going to show for Mohammed Shtaya, who, like I said, is an advisor to Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. But I am going to show several more clips giving the Palestinian side this week, as I said. I'm going to show at least one more clip from Hanan Ashrawi over on Fox News Sunday, where Chris Wallace asked her, the difficult questions, of course, since she was on Fox News, about Hamas being responsible for their own civilian casualties, because they're firing rockets from civilian areas. That's the talking point I've showed from Benjamin Netanyahu last week, and I'll show some more of that this week. But at least this week I have some extended response on that, and here's Hanan Ashrawi's response to that argument from Fox News Sunday with Chris Wallace in this clip.
You talk about Israel holding the people in Gaza captive. The death toll in Gaza now is over 1,000 people, but isn't a lot of the responsibility on Hamas and the various other resistance groups in Gaza who continue to fire thousands of rockets into Israel? If you were to stop the rocket attacks, which attack Israeli civilians and force them to run for bomb shelters, if you stop those, wouldn't the fighting end?
If Israel stops its occupation and its enslavement of the whole nation, its captivity of the people of Gaza, the West Bank, Jerusalem, treating us like some subhuman species, then the violence will stop. The violence is generated by a very abnormal condition called the Israeli military occupation. They devalue our lives and rights. They persist in bombing and shelling people, civilians, and then they blame the victims. I'll tell you something frankly. If Israel does not attack the Palestinians, if Israel does not continue with this ruthless bombing of whole families. Look, about 50 families were totally annihilated. Whole neighborhoods, whole areas were demolished. They have F-16s, they have gunboats, they have Apache gunships, they've been shelling by tanks, and so on. And the Palestinian people are being asked to leave their homes, some of them, not all, because Israel thinks it has the right to demolish their homes. Whole neighborhoods. You're in Washington. Imagine if Montgomery County or Fairfax or whatever, they're being told, leave your homes because we want to shell them. They've done nothing wrong. They want to live in their own.
It's interesting to see hear Hanan Ashrawi, the Palestinian representative there, talk about the destruction of whole neighborhoods, because that was one of the questions I raised in last week's show about whether this shelling on the bombing and shelling on the from the Israelis into Gaza, whether it was targeted at sites where missiles were coming from, or whether they were actually destroying whole neighborhoods. And there was some evidence they were destroying neighborhoods, and I'm going to show a little more evidence of that later. But I want to show one more Palestinian representative who was on the Sunday morning shows. The last two I showed, Mohammed Shtaya and Hanan Ashrawi, both represent the Fatah wing, the PLO wing that controls the West Bank, not the Hamas wing that controls the Gaza Strip. But this, on Face the Nation, on CBS, they actually had a couple clips of this Charlie Rose interview with Khaled Meshaal, who is the leader of Hamas. I think he's in Qatar. I can't remember where the interview took place. I think it was in Qatar, or Qatar, as some people say. And I'm going to show two clips from him. First, where he just talks about what is it that Hamas wants out of this conflict. And I'll talk about that a little more after you see that clip. It starts off with Bob Schieffer going over to Charlie Rose interviewing Khaled Meshaal, and there were just a couple brief clips on Face the Nation. Apparently the entire 1 hour interview is going to be on PBS, Charlie Rose's show on PBS tonight, so you can watch that yourself. But here's one of the two clips I want to show from Face the Nation here.
Does Hamas want?
The war in Gaza sends two messages, Mr. Charles, to the world. The first message, it is high time to lift the siege on Gaza. Gaza wants to live as other people.
That is exactly what Secretary Kerry has asked to be negotiated after the ceasefire, to have a week of ceasefire, so that you could do that. But you're asking that to be done as a precondition to the negotiations.
This is not a prerequisite. Life is not a prerequisite. Life is a right for our people in Palestine. Since 2006, when the world refused the outcomes of the elections, our people actually lived under the siege of 8 years. This is a collective punishment. We need to lift the siege. We have to have a port. We have to have an airport. This is the first message. The second message, in order to stop the bloodletting, we need to look at the underlying causes. We need to look at the occupation. We need to stop the occupation. Netanyahu doesn't take heed of our rights. Mr. Kerry, months ago, tried to find a window through the negotiations in order to meet our target, to live without occupation, to reach our state. Netanyahu has killed our hope, killed our dream, and he killed the American initiative.
So that's Khaled Meshaal, direct leader of Hamas, rather than getting it secondhand from the Fatah PLO Palestinians. That's the leader of Hamas himself explaining his position. And I want to show one more clip from him where he addresses one of the big issues that people hold against Hamas. You know, the pro-Israel side often says that Hamas doesn't recognize the right of Israel to exist. You know, the PLO actually, the Fatah wing, did go take that step at one point where they recognized the right of Israel to exist. And Charlie Rose asked Khaled Meshaal to address that point, and his answer is kind of interesting, which I'll discuss a little more after I show you that clip over here.
I'm ready to coexist with the Jews, with the Christians, and with the Arabs and non-Arabs, and with those who agree with my ideas and those who disagree with them. However, I do not coexist with the occupiers, with the settlers, and those who...
it's one thing to say you want to coexist with the Jews. It's another thing you want to coexist with the state of Israel. Do you want to coexist with the state of Israel? Do you want to represent, do you want to recognize Israel as a Jewish state?
No. I said I do not want to live with a state of occupiers. I do coexist with other religions.
I'm assuming they're no longer occupiers. At that point, do you want to coexist and recognize their right to exist as they would recognize your right to exist
عندما تقوم الدولة الفلسطينية.
When we have a Palestinian state, then the Palestinian state will decide on its policies. You cannot actually ask me about the future. I answered you, but Palestinian people can have their say when they have their own state without occupation. In natural situations, they can decide the policies vis-a-vis others.
So I thought that was kind of an interesting answer from the leader of Hamas, Khaled Meshaal, about why Hamas refuses to recognize Israel. He says that first there has to be a Palestinian state, and then it will be up to the Palestinian state to decide which countries they want to recognize and which ones they don't, which, I don't know, that seems like a little bit late in the peace process for something that's really important to the Israeli side of the negotiations, but that may explain why it is that Israel is trying to drive this wedge between the Hamas wing of the Palestinians that controls the Gaza Strip and the PLO Fatah wing that controls the West Bank, and wants to make sure that they don't get the money that they can use to pay their bureaucracy. And that's, I'm going to show some more clips of Benjamin Netanyahu talking about demilitarization to make sure that the money doesn't get to Hamas. But first I want to show a clip of Benjamin Netanyahu talking about the bombing of a UN school. That was one of the nasty things that happened in the last few days, and I'm actually going to show someone from the UN talking about it as well. But first, here's Benjamin Netanyahu over on Meet the Press explaining why it is that Israel ended up killing like 16 people, including Palestinian children, bombing a well-marked UN school in the Gaza Strip over in this clip.
You about the price to Israel of this ongoing conflict, the staggering number of dead civilians on the Palestinian side in Gaza, and the fact that just this week you had condemnation from around the world by the targeting of a UN school that killed children and those civilians who were fleeing a safe place to go in the fighting. Was this a mistake on the part of Israel, even though the UN says this was clearly marked and that the Israeli forces knew the GPS coordinates of this school?
Well, first of all, Hamas is responsible for the deaths of civilians. We're not targeting a single civilian. We're responding to Hamas action, and we're telling the civilians to leave. Hamas is telling them to stay. Why is it telling them to stay? Because it wants to pile up their own dead bodies. They not only want to kill our people, they want to sacrifice their own people.
But where can they go? You say they should leave. Where can they reasonably go?
I'll get to.
Okay.
I'll tell you, there are plenty of places they can go to, but Hamas is making sure that they don't go anywhere. Now, let me tell you about the UN school. Secretary General of the United Nations, before this incident took place, said that, admitted that 2 UN schools in Gaza were used to stockpile rockets, and he condemned Hamas. He condemned Hamas for turning these schools into military targets, legitimate military targets. Now, we still do not target schools. These schools, the environs of these schools were used to attack us. Our forces responded, but our initial investigation now doesn't show that it's our fire. It actually shows that it may have been Hamas rocket fire. That's still being investigated. But the important thing to understand is that the reason we have civilians killed is not because Israel is targeting civilians, but because Hamas is using civilians as human shield.
But Prime Minister,
we use missiles to protect our people. They use their people to protect their missiles.
Now that's a good line at the end there. That we use our missiles to protect our people. They use their people to protect their missiles. That I've heard that line from Benjamin Netanyahu before, but there are some like really slippery parts to that explanation from the Israeli Prime Minister. He said first, we are firing on these UN schools because they've admitted that they've been storing missiles there, but it was Hamas that fired on that school anyway. It wasn't us, it was Hamas. So, I mean, those are kind of like, he's trying to come up with every possible explanation, even when the explanations don't really match each other. And I also want to show you a clip of someone from the UNRWA, what is that, the UN, it's like Welfare and Relief Relief Agency, or Works and Relief Agency. That's what it is. UN Works and Relief Agency, or Works and Relief Agency, called UNRWA. And this guy's name is Chris Gunness, and he basically says that the schools where Hamas had stored weapons were mothballed UN schools. They weren't schools where there were actual people. And he says that the UN does everything to try to keep their neutrality, and I'll discuss that just a little more after I show that clip. Also from NBC's Meet the Press, he came on after Benjamin Netanyahu, and David Gregory asked him about what Benjamin Netanyahu said, and his response is here.
What the Prime Minister said. You accept what he says? He very directly accuses Hamas of using civilians, of putting civilians in harm's way as human shields. Do you believe that's accurate? Do you accept that?
Let me be very clear about this. UNRWA is responsible for its own installations, and where we have found neutrality violations by militants, as we did with rockets being discovered in schools which were closed and mothballed for the summer, we proactively issued a statement strongly condemning it as a flagrant violation of international law. We contacted all the parties, and now we have actually been in contact at the highest level through the Secretary General's office to get assistance from the United Nations Mines Action Service. We are not an organisation, I hope you will agree, that, as has been accused, is handing over weapons to Hamas. We have behaved responsibly to protect our staff and to preserve our neutrality.
So I guess it's the UN Relief and Works Agency. They flashed that up on the screen while the clip was playing. I had it a little bit backwards. And what I like about that clip is they had someone there to respond to Benjamin Netanyahu. You know, last week Benjamin Netanyahu kind of dominated the Sunday shows, and there was very little from the Palestinian side. There was one guy from the United Nations, and then there was a really short clip from Hanan Ashrawi in sort of a prepared piece, but no like live interviews with any Palestinians. So there's a lot more balance this week, and as I was saying, the Palestinian message is getting out there a lot more into the U.S. media in this conflict. And Candy Crowley over on CNN State of the Union actually asked Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu whether Israel is losing the media war because the message about the civilian casualties and the blockade and those issues is getting out a lot more to the press. And you can see Benjamin Netanyahu's response to that question over here.
Mr. Prime Minister, you know there is a battle on the ground, and then there is a battle in the headlines. My question to you is whether, given the recent demonstrations we're now seeing in the West Bank and the anti-Israeli rallies that we're seeing in some areas of the West, do you think are you worried that you are making more enemies than you are killing?
Well, Hamas is betting on this, because Hamas is betting on the fact that people don't have the context, that they can hoodwink people, basically mislead the entire world. First, I'd like to blow up the West Bank. There's no question about it. And I think President Abbas is charged with the responsibility, formal and practical, of keeping things under control there, because Hamas would like, obviously, to have explosions there as well. Secondly, vis-a-vis world opinion, the world is responding to something that is heart-wrenching, and that is any civilian casualty. We don't want to see a single civilian casualty. We're not targeting a single civilian, but we're faced with a very ruthless terrorist enemy that, you know, Lords bin Laden accused the United States of killing him, is recognized as a terrorist organization by the United States, by the EU, and anybody with a right mind understands this. And they don't care about not only targeting our civilians, but hiding behind their civilians as human shields. When we ask Palestinians to leave the places from which Hamas is firing against us, Hamas is telling them to stay. Why are they telling them to stay? Because they want to pile up more and more dead bodies of Palestinian civilians. So when you look at the civilian tolls, which is what people are responding to, I ask decent people everywhere to remember this. Hamas is responsible for that. Hamas is responsible, and Hamas should be held accountable for these civilian deaths.
So you can see Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu responding to the question about losing the media war. But I also want to show a clip. This is from Richard Engel, and I believe this is from CBS, unless I'm remembering which network he works for wrong, where you can see one of the corporate news media outlets here in the United States actually reporting on Israel destroying whole neighborhoods. Remember, earlier I said I was going to talk about that controversy about whether Israel was targeting sites in Gaza where missiles were being launched, or whether they were targeting whole neighborhoods. Well, check out this report from Richard Engel from the corporate media Sunday morning here in the United States in this clip.
This is what's left of Shujaiya, Gaza's most crowded neighborhood. 2 weeks ago, 200,000 people lived here. Only hints are left of what life was like. Torn laundry on a line, a single plant unmoved, a crib perched on a ruined apartment building. It took days of deliberate shelling and airstrikes to reduce this neighborhood to rubble.
This is no precision war against Hamas and its weapons. It's far more basic than that. It's punishment. Israel's way of telling Gaza, if you fire rockets, this is what you get.
But even...
So yeah, excuse me, Richard Engel, obviously, as you could see from the mark there in the lower right corner, that was NBC's Meet the Press, not CBS. So I thought that was a good report on that controversy as to whether Israel is bombing precisely or destroying whole neighborhoods. And I also want to show, in contrast, the Fox News report on what's going on in Gaza. When they, one thing that I thought was kind of biased, when they listed the casualties, they talked about the number of Israeli casualties, and then they mentioned that a lot of them were soldiers, and then they mentioned the number of Palestinian casualties, and they didn't mention how many of those were soldiers and how many were civilians, and I think it's like 80% civilian, but they didn't mention that in the news report on Fox News Sunday. And then they actually go on and talk about the conflict between Hamas fighters and Israelis right after that, so they make it seem like the Hamas casualty or the Palestinian casualties in Gaza are also military casualties, not civilian casualties. At least that's the way it seemed to me. It's sort of a short clip from the news piece on what's going on in Gaza from Fox News Sunday, and I'll show it to you here, and you can let me know in the comments if you think it's biased. And I'll talk about that a little more after I show here.
Ceasefire or not. So far, 46 Israelis have been killed, 43 of them soldiers, while more than 1,000 people were killed in Gaza and over 6,000 wounded. Hamas vows to continue firing rockets and battle Israeli soldiers as long as the offensive continues.
Yeah, so I really think the way they presented that there made it seem like the Palestinian casualties weren't as 80% civilian or full of civilians as the casualties really are. Though later when Fox News Sunday host Chris Wallace interviewed Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he did mention the civilian casualties, but I noticed the way he mentioned it, he mentioned it as a claim from the Palestinians, not as a fact. And I'll show you that sort of softball question to Benjamin Netanyahu over here.
Mr. Prime Minister, Gaza officials say now that more than 1,000 Palestinians, the vast majority of them civilians, have been killed. International opposition to your operation, as you well know, is growing. Is that not a concern to you? And what about the protests, even riots on the West Bank? Are you concerned at all about a third intifada or uprising there?
Well, first, I know that's what Hamas is trying to do. They're trying to instigate violence in the West Bank as well, and we expect President Abbas to do what he can to, and what he's responsible for, to keep the quiet on that front, because Hamas just wants that to blow up as well. As far as the civilian casualties, I have to tell you, each one of them is a tragedy. We don't want a single civilian tragedy. We're not targeting a single civilian. And every time you see these pictures, they're heartbreaking. But why is it happening? It's happening because Hamas is firing 25,000 rockets on our cities. They're attacking us with terror tunnels. dug into our territory. They're attacking us by land, sea, and air. And obviously, we have to respond. When we respond, Hamas, we're trying to minimize the civilians. We tell civilian casualties. We tell the civilians, leave. Hamas tells them to stay. Why does it tell them to stay? Because it wants to pile up these civilian casualties. So any of these regrettable, tragic civilian casualties should be placed at the responsibility of Hamas. Hamas is a terror organization, ruthless terrorist organization, that not only wants to kill our people, it wants to sacrifice its own people. It uses them as human shields, and therefore it should be blamed and not Israel.
So yeah, there's Benjamin Netanyahu getting sort of a softball question from Chris Wallace, the host of Fox News Sunday, but I did think that Chris Wallace asked at least one question of the Israeli Prime Minister that was a little bit tough, which was about the Israeli blockade of Gaza, which I was surprised to even hear brought up on Fox News, because it doesn't get brought up a lot on Fox News, never mind the rest of the media, where I would expect it a little bit more. But here's Chris Wallace, host of Fox News Sunday, sort of challenging, you know, Prime Minister, sir, what about this blockade of the Palestinians? And I'll talk about that a little more after I show that clip right here.
Discuss a couple of those with you. Hamas is demanding an end to Israel's economic blockade of Gaza, and in fact, you do block most imports going into the country and all exports leaving Gaza to go either to the West Bank or to Israel. And unemployment in Gaza is now over 50%. Don't they have a legitimate demand there, sir?
First of all, we're letting in economic goods come into Gaza. We're letting humanitarian goods as we speak now. With a ceasefire, without a ceasefire, we continue to have trucks and trucks coming in into Gaza. The reason there's been constriction of access to Gaza is precisely because they've used the incoming material, including cement or concrete, to build these tunnels, to build terror rockets, to build missiles and so on, from which they fire. Naturally, we have to make sure that such weaponry, such materials do not enter into Gaza. I think there is a path to get out of this once we have, I think the first thing is to accept the Egyptian proposal. That's the only game in town. What it will do is will enable us to actually get a sustainable ceasefire. That sustainable ceasefire consists of two things. One, demilitarization of Gaza. We want to make sure that there are no more additional rockets, tunnels, missiles, and so on. Otherwise, we'll be back here every few months. Second, economic and social relief for the people of Gaza. Now, if you want economic and social relief for the people of Gaza, you have to make sure that demilitarization works. Why? Because if the international community will rush again to give cement, concrete, to Gaza to build, for Hamas to build the buildings, they'll use it for tunnels. So you have to have a mechanism to prevent the abuse of this cement or concrete. If you want to give them money, you want money to go to the people of Gaza. But if the money comes in and Hamas uses it to manufacture rockets and missiles, you're going to be exactly where we are now. So you need demilitarization and economic and social relief for the people of Gaza. I think that the economic and social relief is tied to demilitarization because otherwise it will simply not work.
So yeah, that is Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu doing what I was talking about earlier, tying the economic aid to Gaza to demilitarization, meaning making sure it doesn't get into the hands of the militaristic Hamas people, or at least that's what I've been reading in some analyses, that it's that hidden agenda that some of the Palestinian representatives were talking about, or what Mohammed Shataya was talking about, where apparently or supposedly Israel is trying to drive a wedge between Hamas and the PLO Fatah branch of the Palestinians, and between Hamas and the Palestinian people, by making sure that Hamas doesn't get any of the economic aid and then can distribute it, and that, you know, gives Hamas more power. And that's supposedly, at least according to some, the Israeli hidden agenda in this conflict. So I wanted to point that out. And having pointed out a softball question from Fox News and then sort of a harder question from Fox News, I actually wanted to show a clip from Bob Schieffer over on CBS's Face the Nation, who I thought also was kind of soft on Israel, and he made some very positive pro-Israeli comments in his commentary that I'm not going to show because I am trying to stick more to the newsmakers in the show as usual, and I have so many clips to show for this one. But here's Bob Schieffer kind of teeing up Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, on the Hamas terror tunnels, and like, wow, these are really bad. They're even worse than you thought, aren't they? Kind of question that I'll talk about a little more after you see that clip here.
Yes, one of the most knowledgeable members of the House of Representatives.
Oh, sorry. That was not the correct clip. The correct clip I'm trying to show you is number 16, the one before that here.
Prime Minister, I know you have been concerned about these tunnels for a long time, and you've known they were up to something there. But was this underground complex more extensive than even you had thought it was?
Well, we knew about the terror tunnels, more or less the size of it. We're obviously getting more information now, precise information, but what you see is this vast underground terror kingdom, these vast tunnels in which they poured in tens of thousands of tons of concrete. You know, people were saying, bring concrete to Gaza, bring cement to Gaza to help build Gaza. And what Hamas did was take all that cement, all that concrete, and poured it into the tunnels that are meant to come in under our communities and blow up our kids and kidnap our people. I think that's why I think that the economic and social relief that people want to have for Gaza, and that we want to have for the people of Gaza once this is over, is tied to demilitarization. We'd have to, as this example shows, make sure that concrete that is brought in is not abused and brought to dig in new tunnels. We'd have to make sure that money that people want to go for the people of Gaza, for their social relief, and we have no objection to that, is not used for buying rockets and missiles and drones and everything else that Hamas is using against us. I think that what we need is demilitarization of Gaza and alongside economic and social relief for the people of Gaza. But the economic and social relief for the people of Gaza, I think, is tied to demilitarization.
So there again you see that talking point from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, which I think can be interpreted from the Palestinian point of view as saying that before the people of the Gaza Strip get any economic aid, we have to make sure that none of it is filtered through Hamas, so that Hamas doesn't have the political power of being the entity that distributes the aid. Although, you know, or you can take what Benjamin Netanyahu said there at face value, that they want to make sure that the money doesn't go into attacking Israel, which actually also makes sense. So, I don't know, it's kind of competing narratives. That's one of the things about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, is it's always about competing narratives, neither of which are exactly true. Or at least that's been my experience over many years. And I showed that clip of Bob Schieffer from CBS's Face the Nation kind of teeing up Benjamin Netanyahu with that easy question about, you know, aren't there more tunnels than you even thought there were? And I also want to show the clip that I mistakenly played for just a second before I played the right clip. This is Bob Schieffer on the same subject talking to Representative Mike Rogers, the Republican chair of the House Intelligence Committee, and kind of teeing him up on the same issue about where Hamas gets its resources. And I'll talk about that a little more after I show that clip over here.
Yes, one of the most knowledgeable members of the House of Representatives, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Mike Rogers. Mr. Chairman, let's just go back to Israel for a minute. Hamas continues to fire these rockets. They've poured all this concrete, as you heard Prime Minister Netanyahu talk about. Where are they getting this stuff?
You know, it's an interesting combination, and there's an interesting development on this front. So Iran is publicly in their own newspapers touting the fact that they're helping militarize Hamas. in the Gaza Strip. And now the Qataris are saying, hey, we want to pull Iran away from that, and we want to support, which is a dangerous combination for Israel. So you have this two-front combination. The Qataris are certainly engaged. We believe that some of this money is coming from Saudi Arabia, not the official government, but from other sources. And so that money, and they pilfer money that is coming in from legitimate purposes to divert to tunnels. So if you think about how obscene that is, the hundreds of millions of dollars they've had over a decade, 20% of the people in Gaza Strip aren't connected to a water source. 90% of all the water there doesn't meet international standards. But they've got, I think the Israelis just closed 35 tunnels. So they're diverting legitimate money, and you have Iran that is maligned into this particular interest in a way that's very, very dangerous.
But I thought the
and I cut out the part of the clip there where Bob Schieffer says the Qataris, they're our allies. How can they be funding Hamas? And Mike Rogers, the Republican House Intelligence Chair, goes on to say, well, that's why this is all so complicated, because we've got our allies funding our enemies, basically. And I also want to show, though, that it's not just the Republicans who are pro-Israel. You know, I mentioned in the show last week that here in the United States, for at least the mainstream of the political parties, you have the Democrats who are pro-Israel, and then you have the Republicans who are really pro-Israel. And the big fight we have is the Republicans claiming that they're really pro-Israel, and the Democrats, they may be pro-Israel, but they're not really pro-Israel. That's pretty much where, at least the mainstream, on the fringes of the parties, there are some people who are a little less pro-Israel. But I wanted to show Nancy Pelosi, who used to be the Speaker of the House and is now the Minority Leader, and she represents, so that makes her a mainstream Democrat, but she also represents San Francisco and kind of the more left wing of the Democratic Party. And you'll see in her answer she even mentions that she has Palestinians amongst her constituents, but you can also see she takes a pretty pro-Israeli stance, talking over to Candy Crowley over on CNN State of the Union on the Sunday morning shows here.
Look as though Israel has gone too far. You heard Ben Rhodes from the President's Deputy National Security Advisor, who said, well, we've told them we think they could be doing more. Should Israel be doing more to protect civilians in Gaza?
Well, war is a deadly thing, and I have many Palestinians who live in my district, and I'm hearing from them regularly about how their families are affected who live in the region. It's a terrible thing. But let me just say that any missile that comes from someplace has a return address. And if Israel is responding to that address, then it's a shame that the Palestinians are using, are rumored to be using children and families as shields for their missiles. Should we all try to, first of all, avoid conflict? The Hamas initiated this. So again, this has to be something where we try to have the two-state solution, that we have to support. We have to support Abbas and his role as leader there. We have to support Iron Dome to protect the Israelis from the missiles. We have to support the Palestinians and what they need. And we have to confer with the Qataris, who have told me over and over again that Hamas is a humanitarian organization. Maybe they could use their influence to
the U.S. thinks they're a terrorist organization, though, correct to you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we've had that discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that part at the end where Nancy Pelosi says, the Qataris have told me that Hamas is a humanitarian organization, so maybe they can use their influence with Hamas to get them to stop using, or rumoring to be used, civilians as human shields. She at least put that qualification on it, although that seems to be one of the war crimes that the Palestinian side has been fairly well accused of, based on the evidence I've seen. The whole using human shields as a war crime. You know, that's the, you did a war crime, you did a double war crime. That's the competing narratives that both have some truth, but neither have the full truth, like I was saying. But anyway, I'm showing how the Democrats are also pro-Israel, although not really pro-Israel like the Republicans are. And so I want to show one of the very pro-Israel Democrats, Senator Chuck Schumer of New York, over on Meet the Press, talking about also, if there's some limit on what the Israelis should do. And he actually says the problem is making sure we don't put pressure on Israel. That's how we're going to make sure we get peace, as you can see over in this clip.
No, here's what I think. First, the loss of life is terrible. You see the pictures, the grieving mothers on both sides of the Israel-Gaza border, and your heart just breaks. But we're not going to have peace if there's a ceasefire or we're not going to have peace if Israel is pressured to go for a ceasefire that allows Hamas to maintain its tunnels and its rockets. There have been 3 ceasefires. Israel's accepted all 3. Hamas, just last night again, rejected another ceasefire. And then the minute the ceasefires are over, they sent rockets back into Israel. Let's not forget one thing. Hamas is an organization that's sworn to Israel's destruction. It believes it has the moral right to do military action against Israel at any time. And so we can't use these ceasefires as simply ways for Hamas to reload. Once Israel is allowed to take care of the rockets and the tunnels, I believe there can be a real lasting ceasefire and eventually peace in Gaza, because when Hamas doesn't have the ability to militarily attack Israel, as it has done repeatedly over the years, then it will lose its weight. The Palestinian people will bring in a more moderate group, and the humanitarian aid and the economic aid will be used to help them, not to build tunnels, not to pay for rockets. So it's really almost impossible to have peace as long as Hamas is in control of Gaza. A ceasefire should happen, but it should happen without pressuring Israel to avoid getting rid of the rockets and tunnels. That's Hamas's trump card.
So, yes, that's Democratic Senator from New York, Chuck Schumer, saying that the way to peace in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in Gaza is to minimize the pressure on Israel so they can get rid of Hamas, and that will lead to peace. That, like I said, that's the mainstream Democratic Party position, and it's fairly pro-Israel. It may not be as pro-Israel as the Republicans, but I wanted to round out the Democratic position. I showed Nancy Pelosi, who is a leading Democrat from the House of Representatives. I showed Chuck Schumer, who is from the U.S. Senate. And so I want to show a representative of the presidential administration, the executive branch. This is Ben Rhodes, who's Deputy National Security Advisor, and this is the last clip I'm going to show on the whole Gaza topic. I guess it took me almost an hour here, or will take me over an hour by the time I'm done. And he's also, I think I showed a reference to this earlier. This is where Ben Rhodes basically talks about how far should Israel be able to go over... oh, I'm sorry. This is actually Ben Rhodes over on CNN State of the Union with Candy Crowley, talking about how far Israel should be able to go in this clip.
The administration has said repeatedly Israel has a right to defend itself. Is there any way it can go too far in defending itself? I talked with the Prime Minister about, there's the battle on the ground, there's a battle in the headlines, and it's losing the battle in the headlines.
Well, the basic principle holds. If there are rockets being fired indiscriminately into Israel, they have a right to defend themselves. Hamas is responsible for the conflict. We have said that Israel does need to take greater care to avoid civilian casualties and the type of loss of life we've seen on both sides in recent days.
The Prime Minister told me he's done, they're doing everything they possibly can. Do you think that's so?
I think you can always do more. The U.S. military does that in Afghanistan. We go to great lengths. We don't have a perfect record, but we believe in densely populated areas like this, you have to go the extra mile to avoid loss of civilian life. The best way to do that is through a ceasefire, and so that's why we focused our diplomatic efforts on getting a calm so that we can then negotiate a more comprehensive ceasefire.
So, yeah, negotiating a ceasefire, that's the administration position. That's what John Kerry's been trying to do, and you can see that's why Benjamin Netanyahu, when in his talking points, he talked about how many ceasefires Israel's been ready to accept. And anyway, those are all the clips on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that I picked out from the Sunday morning shows for you all, and you can let me know in the comments what you think. I've been noticing I've got, even though it's 3:17 a.m. in the morning Pacific time where I am right now, I notice I have 55, 60 people watching, which I appreciate, and I've been reading through your comments, so keep that up. I have several other topics I'm going to cover that several of them are just as serious as the Gaza situation. You know, I started off with that Bill Maher clip talking about all these serious news stories being a sign of the apocalypse, which of course was a joke. But I also want to show another Bill Maher joke about the immigration issue, because I'm going to show several clips on the immigration crisis at the border, which has slowed a little bit. The number of unaccompanied minors showing up on the border between the United States and Mexico has dropped a little bit, although the kids aren't generally Mexican kids. They're actually from Central America, El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, and I've discussed this in previous LiberalViewer Sunday Live clip roundups, and I'm going to show some serious clips on it. But first, here's Bill Maher. He actually did a little Dr. Seuss parody about, oh, the places you'll go, and I'm not going to show the whole parody, but one of the things he talked about is, why is it that the Republican teabag right, or Tea Party right, he calls them teabaggers, of course, why is it that they are generally have these Christian values, but they just somehow don't extend their Christian values to taking in basically what are refugee children? And here's one of the little couplets from his Dr. Seuss book on Friday nights, Real Time, with Bill Maher on HBO in this clip.
The teabaggers say, it's not that we're monsters or that we don't care. It's just that God put us here and God put you there.
And, you know, actually that is sort of a big issue in the immigration fight. You believe that because of where you're born, you have more right to the resources near where you're born. That's basically, I guess, the nativist argument, which I don't really buy. And I don't know, maybe I'll talk about that a little more later after I show a few more clips. But first I want to show from This Week with George Stephanopoulos, although George Stephanopoulos wasn't there. Jonathan Karl kind of filled in for him along with Martha Raddatz, but they had sort of a longer piece from their reporter Jim Avila giving sort of the latest updates on what's going on with this border crisis, and he talked about how some of the facts that Pew Research found out about these kids crossing the border, that they're younger than people thought and they're more female than people thought, because, you know, a lot of these protesters from the Tea Party were saying these are actually, you know, these thugs and gang members who are going to invade our cities. And anyway, here's a few actual facts from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos reporter Jim Avila in this clip.
I'm Chris Wallace. Will Congress do anything about the immigration crisis?
Oh, sorry, that was not Jim Avila. That was Chris Wallace, because before I show the long Jim Avila piece, I was going to show you that Chris Wallace actually led Fox News Sunday with immigration. No one else led with immigration, and they like made Ukraine sort of their like last sort of afterthought story. And I'm going to show you that first. Then I'll show you the longer piece from Jim Avila. Sorry about that little glitch. I will blame it on it being 3:20 in the morning, but here's Chris Wallace showing that immigration is front and center for Fox News Sunday, unlike any of the other news shows, as you can see here.
I'm Chris Wallace. Will Congress do anything about the immigration crisis before it goes on its long summer recess?
We've got a president that's AWOL. And the president ought to get engaged in this if he actually wants something to happen.
What's really going on is that Republicans in Congress are directly blocking policies that would help millions of Americans.
We'll discuss immigration and the GOP agenda with Tea Party favorite Steve Scalise in his first national interview since being elected House Majority Whip. Plus, with thousands of children crossing the border, will the battle over immigration reform boost Democrats or Republicans in the November election? Our Sunday group weighs in. Then, the fighting resumes in Gaza as Hamas rejects one ceasefire and then asks for another. We'll discuss the conflict with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and top Palestinian leader Hanan Ashrawi.
Yeah, so you can see it was actually Gaza that was the second story. Immigration was the first story, and I'll show later, they almost avoid mentioning what's going on in Ukraine at all on Fox News Sunday. No one else led with immigration, and I guess that's because it's sort of hot topic with the Republicans. I'm going to show a little bit more on that in a minute. But first I want to show that clip from ABC reporter Jim Avila that I already introduced sort of mistakenly there. And like I said, he sort of gives some information about these, or he does give some information about the unaccompanied minors showing up at the U.S. border, saying they're more female and they're younger, so they're not these gang thugs. And then there's several other interesting facts over in his report from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos over here.
This week, we learned the thousands of unaccompanied minors crossing the U.S. border illegally are younger and more female. Pew Research Center reporting the number of children crossing alone younger than 12 more than doubled over 2013, and the number of girls is up 77%. And this week, there were new ideas on how to stop them. From Texas, the National Guard. 1,000 to the border within a month in what Governor Rick Perry is calling Operation Strong Safety.
What we're asking the National Guard to do is to be a force multiplier.
But critics call the $12 million a month deployment Operation Symbolic Act, since by law, most agree, guardsmen can't actually arrest immigrants. The White House announced that the number of unaccompanied children dropped by half from June to July. And the president met with his counterparts from Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, unveiling a new pilot program to offer some desperate families legal refugee status in the U.S. without breaking immigration laws.
It'd be better for them to be able to apply in country rather than take a very dangerous journey.
An alternative for a limited number of Central Americans, who today often ride atop the dangerous freight train called the Beast through Mexico, a trek chronicled in our sister network Fusion special report that included anchor Jorge Ramos' swim of the Rio Grande.
Well, the current's strong, eh? I still can't touch it right now.
And his crawl through the tunnels under the border.
If they can make it, they'll be here safely, at least for a while.
A humanitarian crisis Congress is now being asked to help end before August vacation. For this.
So I thought that was a fairly good report from Jim Avila from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. But the interview that Jonathan Karl then did with the politicians, the newsmakers, they had on Senator John Cornyn, Republican from Texas, and then this Democratic Congress person from Texas, Henry Cuellar, who I've showed before. I didn't think that discussion was really all that informative. I mean, they talked a little bit about their bipartisanship, but they didn't really talk about the details of the different proposals for dealing with the situation. These two, this Republican senator from Texas and the Democratic congressperson from Texas, have gotten together to do this, what they call bipartisan bicameral meaning it's both the House and the Senate. And I'm not sure which one is their bill, but they're basically three different proposals that I'll show in a Fox News segment where they're actually a little more informative about what the different options are. Well, I'll talk about that a little more after I show this clip of Jonathan Karl getting the reporter Jonathan Karl getting Senator John Cornyn and Representative Henry Cuellar to talk about whether they need to change this 2008 law that gives protections to these refugee children to get before a judge and find out whether they deserve to be refugees and get asylum here in the United States. And that's what Jonathan Karl's asking about, is whether they want to change the law so that kids don't have as much of a right to due process, which I don't agree with, but which seems to be important to both of them over in this clip.
It's a solution the Democrats still oppose, right? I mean,
well, in the Senate, Senator Reid has said he still opposes our proposed solution, but John, my view is a solution beats no solution every day, and nobody's offered an alternative, so I hope we will act.
And including money to help deal with these kids while they're here.
Sure. I think the House will come with a skinny down bill in terms of money, but couple it with a policy which will actually solve the problem. And that sounds like what the House is going to pass, what I hope the Senate will take up and pass as well.
And yet, Congressman Cuellar, you've joined with Senator Cornyn here, the only kind of bipartisan approach to this, which includes changing that 2008 law that puts it different between the kids coming from Central America and those going to Mexico. Those coming to Mexico can go back immediately. Those from Central America have to go through a whole different process. And yet you're virtually alone among Democrats up there.
Well, actually, the American public wants us to have an orderly border. Right now, they're seeing chaos at the border, number one. Number two, keep in mind that President Obama on June 30th sent a letter asking for money and a policy change. Secretary Johnson has done a real good job. He's been steady among all this political pressure, and he's stayed on. So there are other Democrats that do support this.
No, but Nancy Pelosi, Harry Reid, the Democratic leaders, most of the rank and file, I mean, they're not running and joining you on this on the Hill.
Well, again, President Obama requested this at the beginning. Secretary Johnson has been good, but again, I represent the district. I don't just go down there once in a while and see what's going on. I live there. 42,000 of the unaccompanied kids out of the 42,000 out of the 58,000 have come through that small area. So we're at the epicenter, and we've been working with the men and women at the Border Patrol and the folks at the community that have been dealing with this on a day-to-day basis. We need the resources, and we also need a policy change.
Okay.
Now, that policy change that he's talking about is a change to this 2008 law that says that child refugees, unaccompanied minors that don't come from contiguous countries, meaning Canada and Mexico, get this extra process where they get to go before a judge and claim to be refugees if they are refugees. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I'm not sure why Henry Cuellar wants to get rid of that protection. But I also want to show a clip from Fox News Sunday where Chris Wallace asked the new House Republican whip, Steve Scalise, there was that shakeup where Eric Cantor lost and he was replaced as majority leader, which opened up the whip spot, but because the whip took over the majority. Anyways, like there was this series of promotions in the Republican Party, and this Tea Party guy, Steve Scalise, became the new House Majority Whip, and this is his first interview since becoming House Majority Whip. And Chris Wallace asked him about the three different plans, and to give Chris Wallace credit, I think he described the three different options, the House Republican option, the Senate Democrat option, and the Obama administration position on this. And I'll show Steve Scalise's response. And one of the things I marked here is when they talk about making things easier, keep in mind what they're talking about is making it easier to send these children home without giving them due process to tell a judge that they deserve to have asylum as refugees. And I don't know who exactly that's easier for, but it's not really easier for the kids. And I'll discuss that a little more after I show that clip, which is clip number 25 over here.
Talk about the immigration crisis. There are still three very different plans on how to deal with it. Let's put them up on the screen. The president wants $3.7 billion to help the children and also beef up enforcement, but no change to the 2008 law to make it easier to send children home to Central America. Senate Democrats want $2.7 billion to do roughly the same. And House Republicans want less than $1 billion, focusing on enforcement and also changing that 2008 law. Congressman Scalise, will Congress and the president make a deal before you guys go home for this 5-week recess?
Well, Chris, we're going to keep working until we get this problem solved. The bottom line is you've got a crisis going on. The president refuses to acknowledge that it's even existing. The president's been AWOL on this from the very beginning. We want to actually fix the law, and wouldn't it be good to actually allow the governors of those border states to be able to call the National Guard and help secure the border? This all has to start with securing the border, not writing the president a blank check to keep doing what he's doing that's not working, but actually solve the problem. Even his own Homeland Security Secretary said the 2008 law needs to be changed. We've got to go make those changes. And ultimately, this is the president's responsibility. He could fix this problem today. He's chosen not to, but the House is going to lead.
Well,
yeah, Steve Scalise, in his first interview since becoming House Majority Whip, he stuck pretty close to the talking points. He didn't even respond to directly to some of the questions, and to show how closely he stuck to the talking points, I'm going to show one more clip from him. This is the last clip on immigration, and it's on a slightly different immigration issue. They're I saw this LA Times article from a couple days ago saying that the Obama administration is supposed to announce, possibly by the end of this month, that they're going to take executive action to give deferred action, meaning they're, you know, sort of a guarantee you won't be deported, to millions more of the undocumented immigrants in the United States, maybe up to 5 million of the 11 million who are here, is one of the possibilities they're considering. And that would be a big deal. But of course, Sarah Palin posted that on Facebook, which is, you know, how Sarah Palin, the resigned governor of Alaska and former vice presidential candidate, communicates mostly is through her Facebook posts. And she said that the president should be impeached for his you know, illegal actions on immigration, refusing to deport people, even though the executive branch has like huge discretion on who they can deport and who they can't deport. That's written right into the law. But I want to show, this is the last clip. This is on Fox News Sunday. Host Chris Wallace asked the Republican majority whip from the House of Representatives about the impeachment issue. If Obama goes ahead and does this executive action, should the House impeach him? And you'll see he doesn't even really answer. He does answer, but he sticks to this talking point about it's the Obama administration that's bringing up impeachment, even though it's actually Chris Wallace who just brought up impeachment. And I'll discuss that a little more after I show that final immigration clip right here.
All right. Meanwhile, White House officials say that the president intends to take executive action by the end of the month, perhaps to defer deportation for millions more illegal immigrants. You're already suing the president for overreach, and the question I have is, if he does this, if he takes executive action, which I know you all believe is illegal, will you do nothing? Will you do something, such as cut off funding for the administration? Will you consider impeaching the president?
No, you know, this might be the first White House in history that's trying to start the narrative of impeaching their own president. Ultimately, what we want to do is see the president follow the laws. But the president took an oath to faithfully execute the laws of this land, and he's not. In fact, the Supreme Court unanimously, more than 12 times, unanimously said the president overreached and actually did things that he doesn't have the legal authority to do.
So if he overreaches again on executive action to defer more deportations, what will the House do?
We've made it clear we're going to put options on the table to allow the House to take legal action against the president when he overreaches his authority. Others have already done that. Cases have gone to the Supreme Court. And like I said, more than a dozen times, the Supreme Court unanimously, I'm not talking about a 5-4 decision, 9-0 unanimously said the president overreached. So we're going to continue to be a check and a balance against this administration.
But
oh yeah, I forgot to say that whole, like, a dozen times the Supreme Court has found executive overreach by the Obama administration, 9-0. That's like a totally false talking point. Maybe when this is a recorded show, I'll put a link down in the video description showing that most of the actions were actually by the Bush administration that finally got to the Supreme Court, and they were 9-0 decisions, and they weren't really about executive overreach. And that whole Republican talking point I've seen floating around about the 9-0 decisions is totally bogus. But that's the last clip I want to show on immigration. But speaking of bogus Republicans, I want to show a clip from Republican Paul Ryan, another former vice presidential candidate, not just Sarah Palin. And he came out with this big anti-poverty plan this last week that actually has some good features. Although to me, there's too much where they like block grant money to the states and give states too much authority over them. And some of those states are run by Republicans who, as David Gregory points out in this first clip I'm going to show, these are Republican governors who refuse to expand Medicaid under Obamacare. So why should we trust them to give block grant money for anti-poverty programs? And block grant means that, you know, you give them a big block of money and then the states have discretion to decide what to do with it in a lot of ways. And anyway, I'll discuss that a little more after I show this clip from Paul Ryan himself being interviewed on NBC's Meet the Press, where David Gregory sort of summarized parts of his program and let him respond to some of the critics, as you can see in this clip.
I want to just put up a summary of what you are proposing for how to rethink entitlement programs and deal with poverty. You'd like to consolidate 11 federal anti-poverty programs, including programs like food stamps, public housing assistance, child care aid, low-income energy assistance, and cash welfare. Consolidate them, have states administer them. They would get a certain amount of money and have some creativity to spend that money. Even talk about the creation of kind of individual case officers at a state level who could deal with a poor family, for instance, and try to give them a path out. You know, skeptics have said, they've cited one thing that really struck me, which is some of the poorest states are run by Republican governors who have refused to even expand access to Medicaid under the Obamacare law. So you can understand why people would be skeptical that giving them that kind of power would actually lead to constructive solutions to deal with people who are poor.
Well, look, first of all, these programs don't work with each other. In many ways, they end up being counterproductive because poverty is a complicated problem and it needs to be customized. And second of all, we have basically a poverty management system with respect to the federal government. If you want to have a healthy economy and have real solutions, you have to have a healthy safety net. And the safety net needs to work to get people out of poverty. So my argument here is, let's not focus on effort, on inputs, how much money we spend. Let's focus on outcomes. Are we actually getting people out of poverty? And the best way to do that, in my opinion, is to listen to people on the ground, the people who are fighting poverty person to person, and give them more flexibility in exchange for more accountability to actually get people out of poverty. We have learned good lessons about the right way to do this and not, and I would argue that we can customize a benefit to a person based on their particular needs, which actually helps them get out of poverty long term. We spend $800 billion every year on 92 different programs to fight poverty, yet we have the highest poverty rates in a generation.
But let's talk about...
We need to change the focus, and I think this is a very good step in the right direction. I want to have a conversation about how to improve the outcomes.
Let's...
So, yes, that's Representative Paul Ryan, a Republican, talking about his new anti-poverty program. And like I said, I'm kind of skeptical myself, but one interesting clip I want to show... not from like a direct newsmaker. This is a professor at Berkeley, I guess, but he was labor secretary in the Clinton administration, and he's sort of a leading pundit these days, Robert Reich. And he actually said some good things about Paul Ryan's plans, which is kind of surprising from a liberal Democrat like Robert Reich. And I'll discuss that a little more after I show that clip here.
Robert, you're not a Paul Ryan guy. I mean, you've been about as critical of him as anybody, but I've seen it. You think that this poverty plan is a serious one?
I think it's a serious one. In fact, I was frankly very impressed. Paul Ryan, who has been cutting programs for the poor left and right, or at least trying to do that for several years now, awarding tax breaks to the rich. Suddenly, he has had a conversion of some sort, and he is now coming out with a plan that is actually a very interesting plan. Not only does it expand the earned income tax credit, which is the most important anti-poverty policy we have now in the federal government, he extends it, he expands it. He provides some guidance to the states in terms of actually helping people go forward. It is not exactly a block grant. There are no cuts to poverty programs. This is something that is very new and different from the Republican Party, and I think it deserves a careful look by Democrats.
Yeah, and
Sorry, I'm not going to show SE Cup. I don't know if there are any SE Cup fans in the audience, but I thought that was an interesting analysis from Robert Reich there, the former Clinton labor secretary and economist at UC Berkeley. I think he's at well, I've seen him. I actually went to dinner in UC Berkeley and saw him at the restaurant a couple years back, so I know at one point he was at UC Berkeley anyway. But before I leave that anti-poverty program, and I don't know the details of Paul Ryan's plan, so that's why I want to go look at the details more after hearing Robert Reich say that the block grants aren't really block grants, and that the expansion of the earned income tax credit is interesting. So maybe there's something there. But before I leave the issue of poverty, I actually want to show another clip from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, where Bill Maher had on Richard Wolff, an actual Marxist, and Bill Maher used like this analogy, you know, not like a real deep argument, but sort of like a comedian's argument, again, I guess sort of like last week, as to why he's for capitalism and not communism. And then I thought Richard Wolff's argument, he also used an analogy, and he actually used semantics to try to say that for him Marxism isn't, you know, communism like what was in China and the Soviet Union. Marxism is actually just a critique of capitalism, which I thought was kind of a weak argument too. And I'll discuss both those arguments after I show this final clip in the poverty subject from Bill Maher and Richard Wolff from HBO last Friday here.
What happened with communism was Marxism. I mean, you don't think we already discredited that system? Because my theory, and of course, again, I'm not really a professor of economics, although I play one on TV. Yes. Is that my analogy is a rushing river. You know, rivers only go in one direction. The Chinese actually tried to, or maybe they did, to change the course of rivers. Yes. They moved them back. That's quite an exercise in hubris when you're thinking make the river flow backwards. Right. To me, institutions have to be grafted on the way human nature really is. You have to go with the flow of the river. Human nature is greedy and selfish. Capitalism, I think, is the system that takes advantage of that. I just say, put dams and locks on the rivers, but don't try to make the river flow in the opposite direction, which I think is what Marxism does.
Well, I think what happened is that people got excited about Marxism and took it in directions that we don't want to go in again. We have to learn from that. But people have done that with almost any system of thought, including the lovers of democracy, the lovers of capitalism. Some of them did things that in the name of that we don't agree with and that we want to learn what not to do. And I think the Soviet Union, China, and so on give us lessons in what not to do. But Marx was not a thinker about socialism and communism. He never wrote a book about it. His analysis was about capitalism. He was interested in understanding what about it is positive and what about it isn't so positive, and how can we go further. I use this as a simple analogy. If you wanted to understand a family down the street, mother, father, couple kids, and one kid thought it was the greatest family ever, and the other kid said it was a disaster. If you wanted to understand the family, you'd want to talk to both kids. It's not a question of which one is right or wrong, but you want the understanding of the celebrator and you want the understanding of the critic. Marxism, in the way that Marx wrote about it, is the analysis of capitalism from the perspective of a critic.
So yeah, that's HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, Professor Richard Wolff and host Bill Maher having their dueling analogies on capitalism and Marxism. And like I said, I thought that Richard Wolff's argument there was a little bit weak, the analogy to being a critic of capitalism, and you want to hear both sides. I mean, because Marxism is more than just a criticism of capitalism. So that's kind of almost like a no true Scotsman argument, or, you know, saying that that's not, those communists, the Chinese communists and the Soviet communists, those aren't the real communists, or I'm the real communist or the real Marxist because I'm just a critic of capitalism. I like Bill Maher's analogy a little better. I do think that capitalism is the system that best takes advantage of human selfishness, although I'm not sure that human selfishness is the only human drive that is the rushing river. There may be some other, even human altruism is a human drive. I believe in that. Maybe I'm too much of an idealist, but I thought that was an interesting clip to add to the sort of poverty argument with Paul Ryan there, between Paul Ryan and Robert Reich. And I hope you enjoyed that. I now have, I think, about 8 clips I want to show on the whole Ukraine situation and the ongoing investigation into the Malaysian airliner that looks pretty clearly to have been downed by Russian separatists using this SA-11 surface-to-air missile that they got from the Russians. And I talked about how there's not that much of a Russian side, but I guess there are all these weird Russian conspiracy theories about how the plane was brought down, and I'll talk about those a little more after I show Bill Maher making kind of a couple quick jokes about that in his monologue last Friday, and I'll talk about it a little more after I show that clip over here.
But now the Malaysian flight that went down in the Ukraine, U.S. intelligence now says, as we all kind of know, that was definitely taken down by Russian separatists. But you know what, boy, those Russians, they stick to that Soviet propaganda shit, boy. Putin said today, no, it's because one of the passengers turned on his cell phone. That's what, it's it. Either that or Pussy Riot shot it down. I mean, I don't know.
So yeah, I mean, it's not really that humorous a situation, but I did want to show that clip from Bill Maher making a couple jokes about the conspiracy theories. I think the conspiracy theory I saw, supposedly, that's in the Russian media, and I can't remember where I saw this, but it was some news source where I read about this, where they're saying that this Malaysian airliner is actually the one that went missing out over the Indian Ocean, and they took the bodies and they like removed the blood. I'm not sure exactly why, and they had the pilots like parachuted out, and then that airliner was made to crash in the Ukraine to make, you know, the Russian separatists look bad. That's the conspiracy theory I heard. But I want to show you a clip here first of, speaking of conspiracy theories, I want to show the Republican attack on the Obama administration here. This is Lindsey Graham, Senator Lindsey Graham over, I believe this is on, is this CNN or ABC? I can't tell from the looking at the clip, and it's very early in the morning here, but I know it's Senator Lindsey Graham. Looks like he was on, it's either ABC's This Week or CNN's State of the Union, talking about, oh yeah, he's, I'm pretty sure he's on ABC's This Week. He's talking both about Ukraine and Gaza and how it's all about President Obama's weakness, and I'll talk about that a little more after I show that clip from one of those two networks here.
He can't send, I mean, you want a more aggressive response. He's been talking to the European allies. We don't, no one here,
Can I take a shot at what I'd have him do?
Yes.
I would come to Congress and I'd ask for additional sanctions on the entire Russian economy, Putin included. I would come to Congress and ask for money to equip and train the Ukrainian military. I would, when it came to Israel, condemn the UN Human Rights Report that holds Israel responsible for the activity here. The UN Human Rights Report is a joke. The UN is becoming more anti-Israeli, anti-Semitic. I would push back. Congress will do this. Schumer, Mendez, and myself are going to push back against this report. When it comes to Syria and Iraq, I would come up with a military game plan in coordination with the regional allies to stop ISA from growing in strength. I would push political reconciliation in Baghdad, but I would come up with a military plan to stop these terrorist organizations from growing in strength before they hit our homeland.
Now, I think the word rant is overused on the internet, but I think that kind of qualifies as a rant. I think those talking points were just went a little too much on the ranty side to be that convincing. And if you want to see that Republican talking point smoothed out and produced better, of course you can see that over on Fox News. That obviously that was not ABC, that was CNN State of the Union. Like I said, I could not tell from my little thumbnail which one it was. But I want to show this isn't an interview from Fox News Sunday. This is just a segue. After Chris Wallace finished interviewing Hanan Ashrawi, he talked about the discussion they were going to have on the panel, and it was all about President Obama's weakness and fumbles in foreign policy, and that, as you can see, is the assumption on Fox News Sunday, and I think it's a lot smoother and more produced and less of a rant than what you saw from Lindsey Graham there, as you can see over here.
Palestinian viewpoint on this continuing
Thank
conflict.
you, Chris.
Thanks so much. Up next, from Gaza to Ukraine, and now the evacuation of our embassy in Tripoli. President Obama's foreign policy continues to hit roadblocks. We'll bring back our panel to discuss it. And what do you think about President Obama's recent struggles across the globe? Join the conversation on Facebook with other FNS viewers.
I like how anything that goes wrong in the world is a struggle for President Obama, not just something that happened. I thought you might enjoy that clip, but I also want to show over on CNN State of the Union, Nancy Pelosi was talking to Candy Crowley. I showed a clip from her earlier talking about Gaza. Here she is responding to this whole argument that President Obama's weakness has emboldened Vladimir Putin, and giving an argument that I think is actually fairly accurate. Not that I always agree with Nancy Pelosi, but I pretty much agree with her answer that you can see here.
Representing the administration. When it came to the Ukraine, the president early on called for sanctions, and then last Wednesday, before the plane was even shot down, the president asked for sector sanctions, even stronger ones.
But the notion that Putin sort of sized up President Obama and said, he backed off on Syria. He's playing footsie with Iran. He's a softie. He's not going to stop me. Has anything happened that should dissuade Putin from that?
Putin is going to do what Putin is going to do, and it won't add up in terms of statesmanship or leadership. As the president has said, Russia is now a regional power. Some of what we see comes from insecurity. Putin, for all of his is insecure about Russia's role in the world now. What's happened in eastern Ukraine with the shooting, to begin with, the aggression, and then the complicity, and by the way, the administration early on getting out there and saying we had the intelligence to say that these rockets had a provenance in Russia as well as the ability to launch them. So nobody's missing in action on all of this. And as far as Putin is concerned, he's a KGB guy who happens to be the president of Russia, and he's going to do what he is going to do no matter who else is in charge any other place in the world. So I would not judge his actions or his motivations by anything other than he is rooted in the KGB, insecure about Russia's diminished role in the world.
Right.
I thought Nancy Pelosi's analysis there was actually fairly accurate and a pretty good refutation of the Obama is weak claim. And I also want to show Deputy National Security Advisor Ben Rhodes giving a defense of what Obama has been doing and talking about whether, first he's talking about whether they're going to give lethal aid to the Ukrainians and why that's not really necessary. And I'm going to show a couple clips from the Ukrainian foreign minister later that really show why lethal military aid to Ukraine isn't a top priority. But you'll also see Ben Rhodes addresses the strength of President Obama on sanctions and whether he's actually going to be able to lead the Europeans to be stronger on sanctions, specifically addressing Germany and Angela Merkel, whether they're going to do strong energy sanctions. And he addresses it, but you can see his answer has a lot of wiggle room in it, and I'll discuss that a little more after I show that clip here.
So is that a yes, that you are looking at giving them lethal weapons and training them on them so that they can do, you know, we don't want to put troops on the ground, obviously, yeah, and neither does anybody else. So you are thinking about lethal weapons, about more intelligence for them.
We don't rule anything out here. So we haven't made the decision to provide certain types of weapons, but intelligence, we do provide intelligence and we review that. We still think the best thing that the United States can do is send a message to Russia through very strong sanctions coordinated with the Europeans. And I'd expect in the coming days, Candy, you will see the Europeans move out on stronger sanctions.
As strong as the U.S. sanctions are, as strong as you want Europe to be?
We believe so. They indicated...
You think Angela Merkel will put at risk the energy that flows into Germany with stiff sanctions of the sort the president's been calling for?
Yes, the President Obama has spoken to those leaders, and they indicated in their meetings last week at the European Council that the energy sector, the arms sector, and the financial sector are on the table for European sanctions. We're going to continue to develop that package with the Europeans. We're prepared to do additional things to impose a cost on Russia, and we are confident that there's going to be strong action.
So he's confident there's going to be strong action, but they're continuing to develop the package, and I don't know, there seemed to be some weasel room there from Deputy National Security Advisor for the Obama administration, Ben Rhodes, and he really was trying to say that they're pulling the Europeans along, and I want to show a clip from Senator Chuck Schumer of New York, the Democratic senator, talking to NBC's David Gregory on Meet the Press, where he actually pretty much accuses Europe of appeasing Hitler like they did in 1938. In fact, you'll see he uses the year 1938 in his answer on what should be going on in the Ukraine, and I'll talk about that a little more after I show that clip here.
Well, I tend to agree with that. Putin has shown he has no conscience. He takes advantage of this horrible downing of the airliner and then just redoubles his efforts and rearms the rebels. And it's about time we took tougher action against Putin. He's a schoolyard bully. What I learned in Brooklyn, you show a bully's weakness, they take further advantage. You show them strength, they back off. So here's what we should do. Our strong hand is the diplomatic and economic. We should raise the sanctions, the economic sanctions that have really hurt Russia already further. We should remind the Europeans who have to be part of the sanctions that they should not be like 1938 Europe, where appeasement governed. If they appease Putin, they will not stop him. He will get worse. And second, we should take diplomatic actions. We should tell Putin and the Russians that if they keep this up, we will move to expel them, along with the Europeans, from the WTO, and we will not allow the World Cup to go forward in 4 years in Russia. Putin has to be told to pay a price. We have to be smart about it. Militarily, we don't have the strength. They have the second largest army. No Americans want troops in the Ukraine. But we do have strength economically and diplomatically. We should use it, and we should make sure and do everything we can to get the Europeans to stop this policy of appeasement. It'll just make Putin stronger, and we'll pay a bigger price later.
All right, we're going to...
So yeah, New York Senator Chuck Schumer there with pretty strong analogies to 1938 European appeasement of Hitler. But what he said about economic and diplomatic strength being more important than military strength is true. It's kind of odd to see a U.S. Senator admit that Russia is stronger than the United States. They have a stronger army. But that's also true in terms of the size of their army, but I'm not exactly sure how you would measure the strength, but in terms of the size anyway. But in terms of whether there's a military solution to the conflict in the Ukraine, a lot of Republicans are calling for more military aid, not U.S. boots on the ground, but more lethal military aid to the Ukrainians. And I wanted to show a couple quick clips of the Ukrainian foreign minister, Pavlo Klimpkin, I believe his name is, where he asked what Ukraine needs, and he doesn't ask for military aid. First on CNN State of the Union with Candy Crowley, and then later with Bob Schieffer on CBS's Face the Nation, he specifically says he doesn't want a military solution. But first, here's the CNN State of the Union clip with Candy Crowley. What does Ukraine need from the Ukrainian foreign minister here?
Are you here to request more lethal weapons? Are you here to request some help in at least securing the crash site?
Look, we are fully capable of that. But for us, it's about recovering the bodies, to get the possibility for the friends and loved ones to get the bodies back, and not to treat them in that way like the terrorists do it. So for us, we are the people of peace. For us, it's about the settlement. And for us, it's about the people of Donbass, of Lugansk and Donetsk, because they hate the terrorists, but we have a number of Russian leaders, Russian citizens, with the special link to Russian security services. And they have to go back to Russia. And we can cope with the people, with the criminal gangs on the ground. Because it's not about internal conflict. It's about terrorists who are just trying, not just shutting down the planes, but keeping people hostages, having also the small amount of pensions from the vulnerable and old people. It's exactly what they've been doing.
So you can see there the Ukrainian foreign minister was asked about lethal military aid. He did not ask for lethal military aid, and it talked about more wanting a negotiated settlement. And it's even clearer in the clip from CBS's Face the Nation with Bob Schieffer, where he specifically says he doesn't want a military solution. He wants a negotiated bilateral ceasefire, and I'll talk about that a little more after I show that final clip on the situation in Ukraine for the show here.
Let me just ask you now, your forces are trying to take back Donetsk. Do you have the military wherewithal to do that?
Good morning. And my first point, and very clear point, we are the people of peace. We are for the peaceful settlement, and we are quite confident that we could negotiate a peaceful settlement with everyone, with the people of Donbass. But we can't negotiate directly, of course, with the terrorists who shut down the plane, who have been killing people, taking hostages, taking even the small pensions from the old and vulnerable people. It's exactly the point. And the main leaders of the terrorists, they're Russian citizens with different connections with Russian special services. And our message is quite clear. We need the bilateral ceasefire. We don't need military offensive. We need bilateral ceasefire. We need, of course, clear control of the border, because everything is coming to Ukraine across the border, not just mercenaries and money, but, of course, the weapons and heavy weaponry. And, of course, we need a clear idea how to reach the peaceful settlement. And we have a peace plan for that.
So it didn't look to me like, at least according to the Ukrainian Foreign Minister, Pavlo Klimkin there, that the Ukrainians want lethal military aid. They're not even really looking for a military solution. But you can let me know what you think in the comments. I've been reading the comments as I go along. We're getting to the last parts of the show here. First, I'm going to show a couple quick clips on marijuana legalization from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, where they had a short interview with Andrew Rosenthal, the op-ed editor for the New York Times, where they came out with an editorial in favor of marijuana legalization, at least at the federal level, to let states experiment. And I'll talk about that a little more after I show that discussion with Andrew Rosenthal and Jonathan Karl. Here.
Surprising twist in the debate over legalizing marijuana. Check your copy of the New York Times this morning, and you may want to do a double take. You'll find an editorial that looks like a manifesto, the newspaper coming out in favor of legalizing pot. Earlier, we spoke with editorial page editor Andrew Rosenthal. Andy, I have to say I am a little bit surprised to see the Times following in the footsteps of High Times magazine. You know, it was 40 years ago this summer that High Times first came out for legalizing marijuana. And here now, the New York Times bluntly saying, repeal the ban on marijuana. What gives?
Well, I'm glad you're surprised. I'm not sure we would have been ready to do it 40 years ago. But, you know, the country has been moving in this direction. Public opinion is clearly there. We've been watching the states experiment, and more states now, it's about 37, allow marijuana either for medical and now for recreational use, and they're doing it in defiance of the federal ban.
Were you concerned about...
Now, I agree with what the New York Times was saying there, that Andrew Rosenthal from the New York Times, but you notice how Jonathan Karl said that the New York Times was bluntly saying it? You think that was an intended pun? I'm not sure it was. And I want to show one more quick clip from that marijuana segment on This Week with George Stephanopoulos, where Jonathan Karl brought it into his roundtable guests, one of whom was a Republican congressperson, I believe from Oklahoma, Tom Cole, who actually said that he thought that the nation was going in the direction of marijuana legalization, although he went on then to say that he personally opposes it. And I'll talk about that a little more after I show that clip here.
He's making a conservative states' rights argument, let the localities decide whether or not to legalize pot. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think we're probably moving in that direction. Frankly, laws are changing, habits are changing. I'm not somebody that, frankly, advocates this. I went to college in the 60s at Grinnell College. I didn't smoke pot. Don't think it's a good thing to be promoting.
But you wouldn't oppose lifting the federal ban.
I think what I would say is let's have a real piece of legislation work through the legislative process on this. You know, so far what we've done is mostly vote on amendments. That's never a good idea to make major policy changes. We've got some advocates, Democrat and Republican. I'd like to see this stuff introduced, seriously taken up in committee, and let's have a national dialogue about it. But not a habit I want to encourage.
So that was kind of an interesting clip. If you're wondering why the Republican Congressman Tom Cole there said, I went to Grinnell in the 60s and I didn't smoke pot, it's because he was responding to something later in the Andrew Rosenthal interview I didn't show, where he said that he went to college in the 70s, so you figure it out. Or I can't remember where he said he went to college. But anyway, those were the marijuana legalization clips I want to show you from ABC's This Week. And for those of you who, my who've stuck it out to the end of this really long show. It looks like a show might hit around the 2-hour mark this week. I have 5 really quick, mostly fun clips from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, all packed together here at the end of the show, all on sort of different topics. First, I wanted to show a clip of Neil deGrasse Tyson. There are actually a couple Neil deGrasse Tyson clips. One is Neil deGrasse Tyson responding to this article about him in the right-wing National Review, where apparently they don't like him, and it has something to do with the way he makes nerds more liberal, I guess, which you can see him discuss with Bill Maher in the clip that I'll talk about a little more after I show you it here.
Review, and there you are on the cover. Smarter than that. I mean, Did you read this article? Because I read it twice, and I mean, they obviously don't like you. I think the reason they don't like you is you're a scientist and a black one who's smarter than they are, so, you know, it's terrible. It's like Obama, you know, a black person taking a white person's job by being better at it. How dare he, you know? What are they getting at here? What is the point?
There appears to be some jealousy that the nerd set, the geek set, tends to vote Democrat, and I think they want some of those geeks. That's my sense of this.
Okay, I didn't get it. But
look, right now, Comic-Con is going on in San Diego. Just go there, take a show of hands. How many vote Republican or Democrat? It'll be overwhelmingly liberal Democrat.
Well, that's not necessarily a positive thing. But
Ooh, Bill Maher loves to do the insult jokes, and I guess insulting the people at Comic-Con is kind of an easy target, but I don't know, are most nerds liberals? Are nerds more liberal than the general population? Or the attendees at Comic-Con more liberal than the general population? I think that's probably true, but I guess you can let me know what you think. I want to move on to another kind of interesting clip with Neil deGrasse Tyson. As long as I'm showing Neil deGrasse Tyson, of course, they had a new rule that involved the creationist debate, and they took on Bill Maher in this quick new rule, took on creationist Ken Hamm and his weird statement that we don't want to talk to extraterrestrials because they haven't heard the word of God. I hadn't even heard that till I heard this new rule, but I'll talk about that a little more after I show you that clip right here.
New rule, creationist Ken Hamm, who runs the Creation Museum, and said this week that we should call off the search for extraterrestrial life because aliens haven't heard the word of Jesus and thus are going to hell anyway. Must listen to this alternative point of view from Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson.
That's messed up.
Beautiful reading.
I thought that was definitely worth watching. I thought, I know there's a big anti-creationist, pro-atheist community amongst my viewers that is so popular, you know, because there's so many anti-creationist, pro-atheist YouTubers that have created a community here, so I wanted to make sure I showed that clip. Now, those last two clips were kind of funny. The next one is sort of a serious discussion that also involved Neil deGrasse Tyson and also involved Amy Goodman, who hosts this Democracy Now! Program, which is sort of a left-wing alternative to the corporate media clips that I show here. And they talked about the brutality of the death penalty. That I was kind of surprised that the corporate media didn't have any mention of this another botched execution in Arizona, where it took 2 hours to kill this prisoner who, you know, had been convicted of committing some pretty horrible crimes himself. But that doesn't mean that we as a society have to bring our brutality down to that level. And that was one of the things they were discussing over on HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, which I didn't see discussed on any of the Sunday morning shows, but I'll talk about that a little more after I show you that clip here.
Kill a person, and this judge who ruled in Arizona, or was speaking about it in Arizona, said something I think that needs to be said more publicly. He said using drugs meant for individuals with medical needs to carry out executions is a misguided effort to mask the brutality of executions by making them look serene. But executions are in fact brutal, savage events, and we shouldn't try to mask that reality.
And he went on to say, this judge, we should use a firing squad, or we should use a gas chamber if we're going to do it, he said. But he is showing how brutal it is. I mean, I actually think that we as journalists should be in there filming executions, because I think when people actually see this, I think then we wouldn't be the only industrialized country in the world who would execute people.
But history doesn't reveal that. If you look at how many people went to the squares to see the execution in the French Revolution by guillotine, that was a hot ticket.
They still do it in Mecca.
That was a very hot ticket.
There's a reason why most countries in the world, certainly in the industrialized world, doesn't engage in execution. I don't call this, what we're talking about in Arizona, which just took place, a botched execution. I think that's an oxymoron. I think execution is botched policy in this country.
Well, that may be true. But but I think what he's getting at is that there is something perverse about trying to kill people in a gentle way. That we bring them into this room and give them this, first we knock them out. It's like, you know, they're on a massage table with the Norah Jones music playing. We're just kind of nudging them over to the edge. You know, you're dying, you don't really know when it happens. It's just crazy.
I definitely agree with that last point from Bill Maher, that we do kind of try to medicalize our death penalty executions, and you know, our execution chambers often look like an operating room, and they don't actually have medical personnel in there because these professional associations don't allow medical personnel to assist in executions. So they often have people who don't know the right way to come up with the dosage, and have problems finding the vein, and it's just really awful. And you know, I actually disagree with, I mean, I don't disagree with the factual part of what Neil deGrasse Tyson said there about how executions will draw a lot of viewers and prurient interest, but I don't think that negates what Amy Goodman was saying, that seeing the brutality will actually turn people off. In fact, I think seeing the way people react in this ghoulish way may turn people off, just because a lot of people watch a lot of people watch something that is shameful to watch doesn't mean that people won't be ashamed of it. I don't think that what Neil deGrasse Tyson's argument there really contradicts the idea that showing executions would make them less popular. Even if watching them was popular, it might make the death penalty less popular because people would be ashamed of the way people watch them, I think. So I wanted to make that point. I have two more quick clips before I end the show. It's getting really late. I'm almost at the 2-hour mark, but I want to show, you know, Bill Maher's been doing this Flip a District campaign, which I haven't really focused on, and he's almost getting to the end of it. They're going to try to use the, you know, power of his show to move the needle a little bit in a political contest to get rid of a really bad representative, you know, flip a congressional district. That's the Flip a District. And I wanted to show this latest Flip a District candidate because it's a Republican woman who said something misogynist, and Bill Maher called her out on her misogyny, which is kind of a twist for Bill Maher, who often gets called out for his misogyny. In fact, I had a very popular post on my Facebook page. It's facebook.com/LiberalViewer, where I showed this Slate article about Bill Maher is gross, talking about one of his misogynistic tweets. But here's a clip of Bill Maher last Friday on HBO calling out a Republican woman on her misogyny. Here.
Your congressman is a congresswoman. It's Renee Ellmers of North Carolina's 2nd District. She's running against Clay Aiken, and she is.
It's the punchline.
And talking like Todd Aiken. Here's what this genius said last week. Men do tend to talk about things on a much higher level. We need our male colleagues to understand that if you can bring it down to a woman's level and everything that she is battling in her life, that's the way to go. A woman's level? Has she met Louis Gohmert? So welcome to the Final Four, Renee Ellmers. One more week till our summer break. One more slot to go. Go to flipadistrict.com or hashtag #FlipADistrict. Okay.
So I thought that was interesting. You can let me know down in the comments section what you think about Bill Maher's authority to call someone out on misogyny, or generally about this Flip a District campaign, which is kind of interesting. Political quasi-news comedian show trying to use its audience to put pressure on the political system. That's kind of a interesting twist on media, so you can let me know what you think about that. And the one final clip I want to show, speaking about twisted media, there's this story that I talked about briefly last week that Rupert Murdoch, who owns Fox News, may be trying to buy Time Warner, which owns HBO, and of course Bill Maher's show. And he talked about it last week as to how his Real Time with Bill Maher might become Real Time with Bill O'Reilly, and he also made a quick joke in his new rules section about the effect of Rupert Murdoch's purchase, which, as far as I know, isn't going to happen anytime in the near future. But here's Bill Maher's joke about it for the final clip of this very long show tonight here.
Rupert Murdoch wants to buy the company that owns this channel, at which time this show will become paste-eating time with Steve Doocy.
I at least like the picture there of Steve Doocy eating paste, and I see my show is getting up to the 2-hour mark, so you can let me know what you think in the comments. I've been reading them along the way, and I really appreciate all of you who hung out for this middle of the night show. About 60 of you watching live, and I've been reading your comments and enjoying them. They've kind of kept me company for this long 2-hour middle of the night show, and hopefully I won't have these technical difficulties. I had problems with my Wirecast for YouTube streamer. It kept crashing. I was already a little bit late with the show because of other issues, and anyway, I apologize for all that. Everything should be back to normal next week, hopefully for a shorter show, and hopefully I will also have time this week to make one of those edited, produced videos that have been so hard for me to make this summer because of just a severe lack of time to devote to YouTube videos, I have to say. But I hope you appreciated the time I put in making this 2-hour show with 46 clips that I selected from the corporate media here in the United States, and I think there were about 9 clips from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, so that added a little more fun to the show than usual, I guess. You can let me know what you think in the comments, and it's Monday morning here, 4:19 a.m., so I can't really go and start a live discussion. I need to get a little rest before it's time to start the day. I sort of woke up in the middle of the night to do this for you all, and I wanted to get it done before the week started. I hope I started your week with a little more information, at least the information that the corporate media here in the United States thinks is important, and I guess I'll be seeing you all around the internet.